In the last lecture, we discussed about the various compute services within Azure as an ecosystem. In this lecture, what we'll do is we'll talk about the various compute services which are available within AWS, okay, as an AWS stack. So what we are discussing is compute services within AWS, okay. Now, similar to Azure, there are multiple services in AWS also, and we'll focus on those services which are required for Lakehouse. Primarily, this series of lectures are for building the Lakehouse and designing, implementing Lakehouse. And irrespective of the tech stack, we'll have a look at different cloud platforms, third-party tools like maybe Databricks, Snowflake also in our subsequent sessions. So let me go to the whiteboard first. I'll explain that, and maybe we can go through some of the important links like we did in our yesterday's session. So AWS has multiple compute services. Okay, let's talk about these one by one. Let me fix the color here. So we have the first is AWS Glue, which is used mainly for ingestion. We have Amazon EMR, and you see the difference, right? Like some of the services are named as AWS, some of the services are named as Amazon. That's the standards that have been used. Generally, the core services are named as Amazon. Some of the services which are based on the others or which are used, which are not the core services, are named as AWS. But again, this is just my understanding. It might not be correct. But yeah, you will have to remember what every service is. It's either called as AWS or Amazon. Then we have Amazon Athena, and we also have Redshift. Okay, now Redshift, it's a warehouse. Since we are talking about Lakehouse, we are going to look at Redshift from a Lakehouse perspective, like how it can be used for querying the data which is already available on S3. So in the Lakehouse architecture, right, the concept is that we are not going to move any data to a dedicated warehouse like Redshift. Okay. So let's talk about these one by one. So what does AWS offer, right? Like AWS is kind of an ETL service. Okay. If you have worked on things like data stage, Informatica, right? In Azure, you have ADF, right? It's similar to that. You can do multiple things here. It supports Python based as well as Spark based frameworks. Okay. You can write those codes here. Uh, So if you have a very lightweight job, you don't have to do a lot of ingestion and sorry, you don't have to do a lot of processing. You just want something, a lightweight processing framework. You can use Python also, but for any big data related workloads where you have large volumes of data to be ingested or processed, that you should go for Spark, and it does offer PySpark. So I think the latest is Glue 4.0. Okay, it is the latest one. We started with the 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. From 3.0 onwards, I believe it supports all the open table formats. Open table formats, as in just a recap: Delta Lake, Iceberg, and Hoodie. So it does support all of these. So AWS Glue, the latest version, does support of creating all of these open table formats, so that if at all you are ingesting some data from a source and you want to write it as either Delta Lake or an Iceberg, you can do that directly within Glue. You don't have to use any other tool outside this. In fact, if you are using Iceberg, you can also create the tables in the Glue data catalog in Glue job itself. So if you have a job, let's say you have a Glue ETL job and you are trying to write a file in Iceberg, and since Glue has an integration with data catalog, Iceberg can also create tables directly, okay, in Glue data catalog. Now what if you may think, like, if you are using Delta, then what happens in Delta Lake, right? It does not create a table directly. You will have to create those tables separately. Now how do you create the tables? in a Glue data catalog. Let's say if you have some files, okay, if you have some files on S3, how do you create tables in a Glue data catalog, right? You have an option called Glue crawlers. There's something called as Glue crawlers. Who have used it, they would be aware of it. You'll have to use these crawlers to pass the file from S3 and then create those tables in the Glue data catalog. Maybe we'll talk about the catalog some other time because it's a separate service which has a lot of features in it. But for time being, you can remember that Glue can be used to ingest the data and write it into the specific open table format that you want. For Iceberg, it will create the tables directly. For others, you'll have to create crawlers and get the data. So in the end, obviously the data files would be in Parquet. Uh, Depending again on the open table format, Delta supports only Parquet as of now. So if you're creating Delta, it is going to be a Parquet file created, and then you can create the tables. Um, the other option is then you can go for EMR. Okay, while Glue was the first option, it is generally used for ingestion. Um, you can use it for transformations also, processing also, because in the end it's a Spark framework itself. But if you want other Hadoop frameworks also, let's say you are looking to write the data in HDFS, or you want to use even Presto, or I think even HBase, right? These are the older ones, right? EMR is the Elastic MapReduce. It is a service to use all the big data services. Now, those who come from a Hadoop background, they would be aware of all these services. So, including Spark as well, obviously. If you want that, you can use EMR. So, EMR, like there are various ways to deploy it. You can have, I think, nowadays serverless EMR as well. Previously we used to create the cluster, so you can create the cluster and like the Hadoop configuration that we used to do. You'll have one, let's say, a master node and multiple data nodes, so you can say how much data nodes you want to create, so you'll have to provision for that, and then it has features like auto scaling and all. So if you want to run any big data frameworks, yes, you can also use EMR. Again, all the open table formats and all are supported by this. You can always check for the latest versions. What is the latest version of EMR? What is the latest version of Spark and Delta Lake? Does it offer? See, one thing, right? Many times there are questions: should we go for Glue or should we go for EMR? I have put up a separate video for that. But from Lakehouse perspective, I'll tell you something. Um, Also check the versions that these are being supported, right? What Glue supports as Delta and what Glue supports as EMR. Maybe I'll we can search that on Google and I'll show you that. But if I remember correctly, the Delta version supported by EMR is higher than that of Glue. So if at all you need that kind of a version, because the updates that you get in EMR are much faster. Glue is more of a native service within AWS. So sometimes the open source frameworks, right, the updates related to that may come later in Glue. We can check this. Okay, we can check this out. The third compute option is the Amazon Athena. Now, most of you would know Athena as a SQL engine, okay, but it nowadays also offers Spark engine also, okay. So, see, SQL is based on Presto and Trino, which are the open source SQL engines. You can write queries. So, all the data analysts, they can go for Athena for getting some data or querying data which is present on S3. So what it does, Athena, it provides a compute engine or a query engine to query the data which is on S3. Okay. Along with this, there is also a lightweight Spark engine also attached with Athena, so you can do your data engineering activities also here. So it's not just a Glue or EMR uh, are not the only options. If you want to run Spark, you can also run Spark on Amazon Athena, and in fact, it is also serverless. It hardly takes a few seconds for the Spark cluster to get started. It has all pre-built configuration. So if you want to use Delta, Iceberg, or Hoodie, you don't have to do any configurations for that. You can directly just mention that you want to select that configuration, okay, that you want to create Delta, and you're good to go. So you can do all the Spark related coding and all, and at the same time data analyst and all can still use the normal SQL query. Athena, it does integrate with Glue data catalog, so you should be able to browse all the tables. All the access permissions can be controlled from the lake formation service. So these are all the other services related to cataloging and access control that you can use along with Athena. So that's another way. um to use as a compute engine. So you can provision all of these depending on your use cases, right? Um, like all of them are like, say, pay Athena is a pay as you go service. You get only charged when you use it based on the queries and all. So no harm in provisioning these. Okay, it's just an EMR. If you keep a cluster running 24/7, that's the when you're going to get charged. So be just careful when you're using EMR. Also, one glue, look for how many executors that you are using, right? So try to run it with smaller POCs with just 2 or 3 nodes. If it is higher one, then you can do the math and accordingly scale it up. And finally, Redshift, right? Redshift being a data warehouse, we have to load the data. But when it comes to Lakehouse, we can still use the concept. Right? There is something called as the Redshift Spectrum, which through which you can directly query the data which is on S3. So similar to Athena, right? Athena queries the data on S3. Spectrum can query the data on S3. One advantage is, right, if you have some tables on Redshift, right? See, there can be tables which are loaded into Redshift. There are some data files which are on S3, so you can do the join of these in Spectrum. Okay, so it does allow you that also, and there are multiple other things as well. But as a compute engine, you can think about Spectrum where you can read the data from S3. So that's another one. So these are the different compute options. Now this is just an introductory session, I would say. We are not really doing a deep dive which service is better or what advantage it has. It all depends on your use cases. You these are the ones that you should consider. And again, through this lecture series, right, I'm not trying to focus much on the services or any particular one. It is more about for an architect to know what are the all different options. Uh, right, if you want to look at something from a tech agnostic perspective, like, okay, Azure gives me this option, AWS gives me this option, and again, based on the cloud that you are using, you'll have to take a call. So yesterday we saw Azure had something like ADF, and here we have Glue. In Azure there was HD Insight. Okay, here we have EMR. Then the whole Synapse, right? Space is there, where Synapse dedicated pool you can consider like Redshift, serverless SQL like Athena, Spark pools like Athena Spark. So there are equivalent services which you can check. Uh, Coming back, I will quickly show you what this whole thing is. Let me just clear all of these. And I specifically wanted to show you the glue versus the glue delta lake version. So this is how you should be doing your evaluations, right? When checking, you can see the latest version of Delta Lake supported by Glue 4.0 is this. Okay, this is what I was talking about. So if you see here, uh, right, 4.0 is Delta Lake is 2.1.0, 3.0 is 1. So if you're still on Glue 3, you will get the very old version of Delta Lake. Okay, the latest version which has just come is 4.0. Now I'm talking about Delta Lake. Okay, the Delta Lake it is 4. So Glue version is still supporting 2.1. So if you need some features which are above 2.1, you won't get it through Glue. Okay. Let's look at the EMR version also. Okay. EMR Delta Lake. What is the version that it supports? Okay. So yeah, see Delta version. If you see, uh, yeah. So here EMR latest is 7.1. Okay, and see this is supporting 3.0. So at least this is slightly better. Okay, so what we had in Glue, right, was 4.0 was supporting 2.1. Okay, and now 7.1 is supporting 3. So If at all you want to use some features of Delta 3, you will have to go with EMR. So this is one of the ways to deciding the services. I know Glue and EMR, there are multiple other factors, but since we are only talking about Lakehouse, I'm just going to talk about the newer ways, the new ways that we are building data platform based on open table formats. I'm only talking about that. So you take a call. If at all you are okay with the older versions, that's fine. But yeah, the newer version, the probability of the newer versions coming to AWS, it will be more in EMR because it is based on the open source one and the updates are more frequent. With the native services, it might take some time. So this is what I wanted to show. There are multiple other considerations. Maybe we can keep on talking about it as we progress through our lecture series. But yeah, that's it for now. Thanks for listening to me.